Let's dive right into an explainer about a truly fascinating medical mystery. We're going to journey back in time, starting with a brilliant Roman physician from the 2nd century AD. This is the story of a man whose seemingly flawless logic completely redirected the course of Western medicine, and not necessarily for the better.
1,400 years. Just let that sink in for a second. For over a millennium, the absolute smartest doctors, working in the most prestigious medical schools across Europe and the Islamic world, taught an intricate cardiovascular theory that was completely fundamentally wrong. We're not talking about a minor oversight here. It was a structural misunderstanding of the human body that went unquestioned generation after generation.
Which leads us to the ultimate question we're tackling today. How on earth did the smartest doctor in history get it so incredibly wrong? In this explainer, we are going to unravel exactly how Galen of Pergamon built an undeniable medical dogma. We're going to trace his genius, and more importantly, we are going to pinpoint the precise, fatal moment his logic broke down.
Section 1. Galen's anatomical genius. Let's start with what Galen actually got right, because the guy was far from a fool. Working entirely without modern technology, peering into the dark machinery of the body, using literally nothing but his eyes and a scalpel, he had to be insanely resourceful. Because human dissection was heavily restricted at the time, he worked extensively with animals like pigs and apes. He brilliantly mapped the structure of the heart, identified the valves, proved that blood moved directionally, and correctly realized that arteries and veins were distinctly different structures. Honestly, this was a stunningly sophisticated anatomical achievement for the ancient world.
He saw the highway, but he completely missed the loop. Galen was looking directly at real, complex cardiovascular anatomy. Some of his descriptions are startlingly close to a modern circulatory diagram. But despite seeing all those biological pathways, the actual concept of continuous circulation eluded him entirely.
So here is how he believed the system actually functioned. Galen thought blood was essentially a one-way street. Step 1, the liver constantly manufactures fresh blood from the food we digest. Step 2, that newly minted blood moves outward through the venous system to nourish the body. And step 3, the body just entirely consumes that blood, burning it up as fuel. A one-way trip. The blood never returns to the heart.
But that creates a massive logical gap, doesn't it? How do the two halves of the heart actually connect in a one-way system? Galen knew the heart had a left and a right ventricle, but how did the blood cross between them to make this one-way liver-to-body theory actually function? Without a connection there, his entire model just falls apart.
And right here is where the magnificent error happens. To fix this glaring gap in his theory, he invented something completely out of thin air: invisible pores, tiny, fictional holes in the heart septum. Galen basically inferred that these pores absolutely must exist to allow blood to pass from one side to the other. He patched a critical hole in his theory by just assuming they were there, without ever once seeing them with his own eyes.
Because here is the stark reality. The septum is a solid, muscular wall. Those pores simply do not exist. Galen never observed them. He just assumed the structure was porous enough to let blood through, simply because his overarching theory demanded it to be true.
This brilliantly illustrates the profound danger of assumptions in science. Galen inferred pores must exist to fit his broader model. But in reality, because the septum is solid, blood has no choice but to circulate in a continuous loop to get around it. That single inferred detail, those fictional invisible pores, became the load-bearing wall of an entire era of anatomical teaching. A highly logical patch, meant to save a flawed theory, literally morphed into a permanent error.
Section 2. Breaking 1,400 years of dogma.
The sheer scale of this historical blind spot is just staggering when you think about it. In the 2nd century AD, Galen infers these invisible pores. Because his texts were immediately treated as unquestionable doctrine rather than open, testable hypotheses, almost no one dared to challenge him for centuries. It wasn't until the 1500s that Andreas Vesalius meticulously dissected human bodies and finally dared to doubt the pores. And it took all the way until the early 1600s for William Harvey to prove the continuous blood loop. Just think about that immense gap in human progress.
William Harvey was the one who finally shattered the illusion. Through careful measurement and rigorous experimental reasoning, not just passive observation, he corrected the 1,400-year-old mistake. He definitively proved that a fixed volume of blood is pumped continuously in a loop, permanently replacing Galen's one-way street model.
Section 3. The anatomy of an error. So why did this specific error survive for over 1,000 years? Well, Galen's texts were treated as unquestionable doctrine.
There was a prolonged lack of direct human dissection, meaning nobody was physically checking his work. Furthermore, his theory explained just enough of the observable phenomena to avoid deep, practical scrutiny. And most dangerously of all, it was wrapped in overwhelming, unchallengeable authority. This wasn't about ancient ignorance. The error survived because careful reasoning got permanently stuck behind unchecked authority and assumptions that simply seemed plausible enough at the time.
This brings us to the absolute core of today's explainer. One inferred detail hardened into unquestioned fact once it was wrapped in enough authority and taught without room for revision. Galen wasn't a sloppy scientist. He was an incredibly careful observer who was just wrong about one crucial thing. And the educational system of the time protected that error at all costs. It shows us exactly why we must always rigidly differentiate between what we have directly observed and what we have merely assumed to make our models work.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. Look around at today's established dogmas, the things we casually accept as unquestionable fact in our modern world. Ask yourself, what modern scientific assumptions might just be our version of invisible pores? Keep questioning, keep observing, and never let authority replace evidence.